Hello, my name's Nina Oram. I'm the author of a young adult fantasy trilogy called the Carrowkeel series, published by Luna Press Publishing. The series follows the adventures of a 16-year-old girl called Jasmine, who's moved from London to the west of Ireland with her mum and Irish stepfather, plunges her into a dark supernatural world. I will be reading two extracts from the first book in the series called The Joining, which I had the honour to talk about at this year's Chimera Festival in Edinburgh. In this first extract, Jasmine, her mum and stepfather are on the ferry moving to Ireland. The deck was almost deserted. Only a few people seemed determined enough to brave the chill of the wind as it whipped along the side of the ferry. Jasmine found a spot along one side, the side she thought she'd see land from, and looked out across the sea hopefully. Still nothing, still the same endless grey. She folded her arms over the top of the rail, then rested her chin on them, scanning the water, prepared to wait. Her mind drifted, as if caught by the waves, the endlessly restless tide. She was in Canada, living with her dad in a white wooden house with the beds covered in knitted patchwork blankets, an orchard at the bottom of the garden. They'd have a dog, a big Canadian one that would follow her around, and they'd be happy, and her dad wouldn't be broken, not knowing how to fix himself, like pieces of fruit in a bowl, slowly rotting one another, souring bit by bit. Someone was watching her. Jasmine knew it suddenly, instinctively, and lifted her head to look. At the far end of the boat, standing all alone and leaning on the back rail, was a man dressed in a worn black suit, covered by a long dark grey coat that was way too big for him. Even from this distance, she could see how white his skin was, his face, his hands dark against the cloth, and the blackness where his eyes should be. The blackness bored into her, making her shiver. She pulled the sides of her coat together and wrapped her arms around it, keeping it there as she looked away and back. He was still staring. "Don't be silly," she told herself. "He's looking ahead, past you, the way we're going." As if to prove it to herself, she looked left, towards the front, but she couldn't help herself. She had to look back. He was still looking, still staring, and this time she found herself staring back. "Don't," a voice inside her urged, but it was too late. She couldn't stop, couldn't seem to blink, and then her head began to spin, and the ferry shrank suddenly, and the side slipped away as the back moved towards her. The man came with it, his face growing as it drew closer and closer, blocking almost everything else out. His white skin gleamed, looked as if it had been bleached not once but over and over, and then stretched, pulled tight over the bones that lay underneath. His eyes were deep set, sat in shadow, and the irises, Jasmine realised with a shudder, were completely black, almost as if his pupils had leaked out, obliterating any trace of colour. Something touched her shoulder. She jumped, turned to look, her breath coming out in a rush. "There you are, we've been looking for you. Thought we'd join you." It was her mum. Jasmine's head span again and the ferry returned to normal. She looked back. The deck was full of people stood along the rails, eager for their first glimpse of land. It was hard to see past them, but she thought she saw the edge of the man's coat, his arm. "I don't know where John's gone to. He went one way and I went another," her mum murmured, looking all around. "Oh, there he is now." Coming from the front of the ferry, he was walking towards them. Jasmine looked away, back towards the man, but he'd gone, the space he'd taken by a family of 4. John joined them, standing the other side of Jasmine's mum and snaking his arm around her waist, pulling her close. He gave Jasmine a nod over her, but still thinking of the man, she ignored him. "There," her mum cried out suddenly, leaning forward in her excitement and pointing. "Do you see?" They all leant forward, but to Jasmine it was nothing more than another darker patch of grey. The ferry moved towards it, the patch growing in front of her, becoming bigger and bigger. and then suddenly, without warning, the grey, the mist slipped away altogether, and she was staring at the dark green of grass. Land, she thought eagerly, in her excitement forgetting all about the man. The tip of the peninsula, low-lying with craggy little inlets, the ferry turned slightly, and, hugging the coastline, began to steer towards the harbour. The land slid smoothly by. Stone walls began to appear, dividing the grass into fields, signs of human habitation that strangely made the land seem bleaker, more remote. Something clicked in her head, like recognition, but not quite. She dismissed it, thinking it reminded her of Devon, the northern coastline, near where her nan lived. "What do you think?" John asked after a few minutes, breaking the silence. It took Jasmine a moment to realise he was talking to her. She sneaked a look at him, as his face still turned towards land, expecting to see something there, some clue to how he was feeling, returning home after so long, but it was smooth and empty. "It looks nice." Even as she said it, Jasmine mentally kicked herself. Her reply seemed so stupid, inadequate, reflecting nothing of what she saw before her. John didn't even seem to notice. "It looks quiet enough, but Ireland's a strange place. It has a funny way of getting under your skin, in your blood. When it does, it doesn't let go easily." He'd lifted his eyes as he talked, gazed at her over the top of Mum's head. There was something new in his gaze, something different, as if he had something important to tell her. The siren sounded suddenly, and John turned quickly away. Then her mum was leading them back towards the stairs, and the moment passed as if it had never been there. In the next extract I'm going to read, Jasmine and her family have moved into Ireland and are settling. She stepped into her bedroom, heard voices coming from outside, and went to the window to look. Seamus was leaning on his bike, talking to her mum and John as Bran scampered restlessly around them. As she watched, Bran raced away and began darting in and out of the fields, first one side of the road and then the other. Seamus said something, and she heard her mum laugh, and then he was climbing awkwardly onto his bike. Another word and a wave, and the three of them parted, Seamus moving off, pedalling so slowly that the bike meandered beneath him. Jasmine noticed the back of his saddle, the masking tape crisscrossing it, keeping the innards carefully in place. Then he was gone, disappearing under the trees. Her mum and John continued on up the garden path and out of view as they followed it around the house to the back door. Jasmine turned away, but her eyes caught something moving in the field opposite, and automatically she looked back. A figure, dressed in a black suit and heavy overcoat, slipped out from behind a tree, turned upwards, its white face staring at her through the bedroom window. Jasmine jumped, her heart thudding as she recognised the figure, remembering him instantly as the man from the boat. She opened her mouth to shout, to call her mum or John, her eyes sliding to the bedroom door and back. She stopped. There was nothing there. The field was empty. She glanced swiftly to her right and left, but the road too was empty. "What is it with me?" she muttered. It wasn't like her to be so jumpy. Her mum and John were in the hallway. She heard them talking as they put their coats and shoes away. Maybe it was the carpenter yesterday, his oddness unsettling her, or falling asleep during the day. That was it. Her mum laughed, the sound echoing upstairs. It called to her, and suddenly she didn't care if it was John here and not her dad. She just wanted to be with people, to feel and see them close. Later, Jasmine helped her mum clear up dinner as John chopped wood in the barn outside. From the field opposite the house, a figure stepped silently out into the road. The night was clear, the cloudless sky a myriad of stars, and the air chilly. It was almost time. He was so close. She was almost ready. Almost. He could sense it in her, smell it. Almost, he rebuked himself sternly, feeling the excitement build. He'd come so far. Now was not the time to lose patience, to become careless, overconfident. With the unknown of Mother Rua near, if anything, he was going to have to be even more careful, even more cunning. Thanks for listening.